fan of telling a woman to move to another country and quit her job and be fully dependent on me in a manipulative standpoint. I don't do that.
I just wanted to say, like, I'm not trying to be a pick-me, but I'm just saying that as a woman, I do want to support a man no matter what. Like, no matter what he chooses to do, whether it be drop shipping as unsuccessful as he might be, I want to be there every step of the way. However, I do think that people should also, like women themselves, should try to get jobs to help support the family, to help support everyone else, because you don't want to end up like you're saying, like how Tate is just bringing women in and then like he just dumps them and then they have nothing else to do.
But a lot of these men kind of want to have like a wife at home with kids that's taking care of the kids like full time.
Yeah, so but at the same
there's
time,
like no space to have a job.
At the same time, taking care of the kids and taking in the man does involve trying to find financial stuff for yourself, trying to fund it, trying to like make, you know, money, make a living.
I'm for it. I think
That's
there should be like equal, like when it comes to work and stuff.
John go, then I have to get caught up on donations because we're really behind. So
yeah, John, what do we need to do to make men great again, bro?
Tell us how Jesus is the path to salvation. Let's
go. There's a lot there. I think, we've spoken a lot this evening about this idea of progress, particularly with women. I think that the word connotes good, but I don't think it's been good. I mean, the woman, or I should say maybe the profile of the person in this country who is supposedly she who has benefited the most from all the liberation and progress that women have made would probably be like, a single working woman, middle-aged with no children. She's been liberated from, the constraints of biology, be that her bearing children. She's been liberated from the constraints of a husband having to provide for her. She's a career woman. She's working. She doesn't need all that, no need for a man or anything like that. But that also happens to be the profile of the person in this country who's the most likely to be taking SSRIs. And I think there's something to be said about that. I also think that it's easier for women to adapt to, like Stephen said, more masculine aspects of society because they're naturally, because of biology, more agreeable and more socialized. So I think it's easier to fit them into that framework. I don't think you can do the same with men. If you look at like the suicide rates with men, for example, they're at the highest they've ever been, broadly speaking, but we don't enforce those standards of masculinity like we would have in the 1950s, for example, where probably you had the strictest enforcement of those ideas of like what a man should be, how he should act, things like that. But men weren't killing themselves at the rates that they are now. So I think that, and I think the youngest guy here, I'm 23. I remember being in elementary school, they started bringing guidance counselors. There was all this talk about boys needing to express their feelings more. Boys need to do this. You see it everywhere throughout society, but for some reason that doesn't quite catch on. But when someone comes along like an Andrew Tate, who I agree with pretty much everything you said about him, or even like a Jordan Peterson, who basically took fatherly advice and delivered it through a lens of like Jungian psychology, it's like this rapid organic popularity. People literally go to like Jordan Peterson events with like tears in their eyes, thanking this guy for telling them how to basically like be a vaguely responsible man. So I don't think the answer is to take men and make them more androgynous and maybe adapt to a more androgynous frame of society. I think you need to make men be men again, and resultantly I think women need to be like women again, because I don't think women are happy, I don't think men are happy, and I don't think that they experience depression the same way. Women tend to experience depression in a much more environmental sense, meaning they are directly affected by their environment. If they're unhappy, I think that makes them depressed. Men experience depression when there's no way out of that environment. I think that we are perfectly okay with going through something, but if we don't see a way out because of all the progress that women have made, we've had to tilt the scale so you guys have a greater advantage in pretty much every aspect of life, and men just don't see that light at the end of the tunnel. And that's why we just kill ourselves. That's why, the common thing is like, well, yeah, men are more likely to kill themselves, but women are more likely to attempt it. Okay, well, why would that be? Because women are like, I'm upset, and men are just like, yeah, I'm not going to get out of this, and they like blow their head off or something. And I think that speaks to the differences in our like natural predispositions as men and as women, and I think that we need to acknowledge that for what it is and restore what would be considered a more traditional set of gender roles in society.
I think real quick, the issue that I have with that, without even getting into the pros and cons of everything, is everything you've said will never come to fruition. This is my biggest issue with Tricon advice.
Little faith.
The problem is that you're never getting rid of birth control, because women don't want to go back to that, and most men probably wouldn't even accept that, and you're never taking women out of the workforce and education, right? For as much as you talk about like traditional stuff has only benefited like the miserable middle-aged woman, the woman to your left that's working on Tim Pool's show has largely benefited from feminism, because women are taken seriously in terms of having political opinions, even at young ages. So I mean, like, right. I don't think we're ever going back to a world where like women don't have reproductive control and women aren't allowed to go to school and enter the workforce anymore.
I would agree with you, I think, if I shared your worldview, in that you seem to have a much more positive or maybe optimistic view of like where our country is headed, where I'm sure those of us on this side of the table think like collapse is imminent. So I think that if and when that happens, which I don't think a collapse would happen in the way that people like to fantasize about, where there's like civil war and
but like who would you model ourselves after? Like who do you think's doing better than us right now?
I think that
Donald
it's going
Trump.
to reach a point where
really? Come on. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it'll reach a point where the cultural entropy will reach a state where people want to do away with these ideas. Like you mentioned, for example, things are going like pretty well if our biggest problem is that like men want to use the women's restroom or vice versa. I think that things get a lot worse than that, where those problems would be abandoned and we return to tradition, so to speak. But I do think it is a very real problem, because yeah, it's one thing if like a guy wants to use a girl's bathroom, but that is like one facet of the whole issue, which is like we are redefining, sex and gender. And maybe Russia is a crappy country, but their descendants are still going to be Russians, and they're still going to have access to normal children. Whereas in this country, I might not be, facing a land war, but I don't know that my children aren't going to be brainwashed by the popular culture to mutilating their genitalia. I certainly don't have my heritage anymore. I certainly am not able to be proud of my history. So if I don't even have my future, it's like, is this really a great country because I have reasonable access to like food, sex, entertainment? Like, no. I mean, these countries I think are better in a more
I think this country produces
historic
awesome
sense.
things like even today. I think things like this podcast are evidence of it. Russia's like heritage is like circle jerking themselves over World War II, where they were the defenders against Nazism. So they weren't even aggressors against it, right? America is the country that ended, and the West is largely who won against World War II against Hitler. The only reason the Soviets killed so many people is because the Nazis tried to invade their homeland. When you look at like in Russia, no offense to Russia, economically that country is not doing too well.
Yeah.
Socially, that country has a ton of problems.
Because the empire collapsed. I mean,
Well, yeah, sure. The empire collapsed, and even internally, like there are a ton of issues that Russia deals
Sure.
with. But like, sure, like Putin can come out and give like what are really like even right-wing American talking points of like, the gays in the West are destroying everything. And the jokes in the beginning of the Ukrainian war were literally like, are your trans soldiers going to be defeating our proud, Russian ethnic persons? And now you've got like Russian dudes who are like committing suicides in ditches because now these trans Russian soldiers are like flying drones and dropping grenades on them, right? And I mean, you've got like the archetypical like trans Ukrainian dropping grenades on like two Russians giving each other head in like a bunker somewhere, and it's like, what's actually happening here? I don't disagree that there are problems, and listen, okay, I'll say it here, I'm welcoming a little bit of a snapback on some shit, because there are some things in this country that are insane, okay?
Yeah.
A lot of the transitions
Talk
have
about
gotten
that,
really
'cause
crazy,
everybody
right?
thinks you
I do-
side for the
no,
crazy
no.
stuff.
Nobody thinks that, because I
No, casual user.
Maybe,
Casual
but
viewers.
I'm literally banned on Twitch permanently that I streamed up for 12
love it.
years.
I love
because
it.
I
Why?
talk about because I was against some of the trans athlete stuff, right? And I got
Based.
involved in. But I'm just saying that, like,
Based.
so I'm not saying that a snapback is necessarily wrong, but like, it's still moving in a certain direction. Women are never, ever going to give up everything they've got. Nobody wants to give up that much autonomy and freedom.
not
well, you
voluntarily.
are presupposing that we would ask them permission before we would simply.
Well,
like,
okay, so
revoke
maybe it's something.
consent.
Okay, sorry. go
I
ahead,
think
Frank.
women would literally like. It would be if you want civil war.
We took
I
away
think
your
you
right
would
to
get
an
a civil
abortion, and you
war.
like cried about it outside of
you
buildings when the police like blocked you off, and then you
Have
basically
you
went
not
back
seen
to your
the
life.
upsurge of like legislation and women getting like politically active because of
Do you
that?
think if
It's
there
like
were a-
Not see the last
politicized nagging.
midterms?
It's like this is not
Do you think
threatening.
that
you
if
not
there
think
were a
voting
civil war
matters?
between men
No,
and
I don't,
women,
absolutely
that
not.
women
well,
would
that's where
win?
we agree.
Women
I
would
disagree.
absolutely win because there would be men that would side with them. In a civil war between men and women, you think men are going to kill all the women and be like, we won, we did it?
You'd have like all
Then
the
those men would be like
crazy-
simps. They'd be
Women's
like, hey,
suffrage and
knock
everything.
it off.
Women's suffrage only happened because there were men that also wanted it, right? Like the
Big
majority class,
mistake.
like men in general, there's a huge talent pool. There's a really interesting. I get a lot of emails about this. Sorry, I don't want to fucking drone on this too much. When it comes to like crazy, like weird, like trans people and autistic people, blah blah blah. There's a lot of talent there that has migrated to places like San Francisco. We make fun of it for being like the LGBT capital of the world. There's a lot of programmers and a lot of talent in that pool though, because demographically they're drawn to those types of jobs. Because a lot of times, like if you can code, you can code. They don't give a fuck if you have a dick or a vagina or if you use Z's or pronouns or whatever. If you can do the work, you can do the work. So the thing that I like about our Western society, to bring it back, is that like we have problems with how much diversity we push. I agree, but holy shit, we've been able to siphon so much talent out of a lot of that diversity. Even Andrew
Right.
Tate himself is to some extent a product of like a really global